I found the first clue in the smallest place imaginable. A forgotten shoebox at the back of the linen closet. It was late summer, the kind of evening that smelled of cut grass and air conditioning, and I had meant only to clear out space for Lily's new school supplies. The shoebox was taped shut with yellowing tape and labeled with a handwriting I remembered without thinking. Eric's handwriting, careful and neat. I shouldn't have opened it. I knew that. But curiosity is a greedy thing when you've lived with quiet suspicions for years. Inside, on top of a folded handkerchief and a stack of old concert tickets, was a key on a small brass ring. Attached to it was a tag with the unit number at a storage facility 30 minutes away. Beneath the key, wrapped in a plastic grocery bag, was a thin leather notebook. I opened it and found pages filled with numbers, account numbers, dates, and shorthand I didn't immediately understand. But at the bottom of one page, in a line that made my stomach drop, was a phrase I did understand. Transfer to offshore, July 12th. I sat on the bathroom floor, the house humming around me, while the world narrowed to that one line. Months of tiny betrayals, of late nights and unexplained expenses, suddenly had a shape. He had secrets. Bigger than affairs or late-night drinks. Bigger than anything I'd guessed. I didn't confront him. I've learned the hard way that confronting without preparation lets the story slip into his hands. Instead, I made myself a plan. I closed the shoebox, returned it to its hiding place, and pretended not to notice, the way you pretend not to notice a bruise until you have a way to make it stop hurting. For the next week I lived two lives. By day I did what I always did. Work emails, school pickups, the small domestic choreography of dinner and homework. By night I became an investigator. I photographed the notebook, wrote down the numbers and cross-referenced everything I could on my laptop. There were bank references I didn't recognize and company names that produced nothing under Google searches. The storage unit number matched the tag. The key in the shoebox had been there long enough to feel like a relic of a life that had been slipping from me for years. I told exactly one person. Mira, my oldest friend from college. She arrived at my kitchen table with takeaway coffee and an expression that said she meant business. I passed the photographs to her, the pages of handwriting, the key. Her eyes widened as she scanned. "This is bigger than you think," she said. "We need a professional." The professional was Amanda. No one I knew better to handle the sharper edges of life. She met me at a small law firm downtown, where the air smelled of paper and strong tea. Amanda is the sort of woman who walks into a room and makes it sensible. She broke down the notebook into a list of concrete actions. Identify storage contents, request bank records, secure legal counsel, gather time-stamped evidence. She explained the mechanics of asset concealment with a clarity that made my head ache. Offshore transfers. Shell companies. Nominee directors. Words that sounded like a foreign language until you realized they described the machinery someone uses to disappear money. "That key and that unit could be crucial," Amanda said. "But be careful. If he suspects we're looking, he'll move things. We'll need to act fast." The words lit a fuse in me. Fast became a race. I arranged for Mira to come with me and rented a small sedan under a borrowed name. The storage facility was a low beige building set behind a row of strip shops, a place you pass without a glance. The keypad beeped as we entered, the fluorescent lights buzzing. We found the unit, #34B, according to the tag, and used the key. The door rolled up with a sigh. The unit smelled faintly of dust and cedar. Stacked inside were cardboard boxes, a slumped garment bag, and tucked under a tarp, 3 wooden crates bound with packing tape. My hands shook as I lifted the lid of the nearest crate. Inside were ledgers and loose legal documents, contracts with names of companies I'd never heard of but that matched the notebook. One crate contained photograph albums. Vacations, family dinners, images of Eric smiling in places I'd never visited. He had a life folded away, photographed and archived like some private museum. In the bottom of the second crate, wrapped in a towel, was a small safe. A heavy iron thing with a combination lock. The sight of it hit me like a wave. I found myself on my knees, fingers brushing the cold metal, heart drum tight. How many safes had he walked past? How many combinations had he kept hidden in his head? I took photos, cataloged serial numbers, and carefully logged the contents as if this were an archaeological dig. We left the storage unit with my pulse still high and a head full of questions. When we drove away, I caught sight of Eric's car on the main road. as if the city itself had been watching and waiting. Back home, Amanda advised caution. We can subpoena the ledger, and we can request bank records tied to the entries, she said. But you mustn't go searching the safe or confronting him yet. We build a legal case, not a spectacle. I obeyed, though the temptation to pry at the edges of his life was nearly unbearable. Instead, I started quietly gathering everything I could. I sat through late-night sessions absorbing invoices and account numbers, scanned receipts, called financial institutions under the guise of routine inquiries, and kept a meticulous timeline. Each small discovery felt like the removal of a bandage, painful, necessary, and somehow purifying. One discovery changed everything. Buried in the ledgers were dates that matched transfers I had found on our joint accounts, but the destination was always the same. A shell company registered under a woman's name. Not a woman from our lives, someone I'd never seen. Another line listed an address in a neighboring state where, when I Google mapped it, a small gallery or antique shop existed. The notebook's shorthand translated into something ugly and precise. Purchase, convert to cash, relocate funds. I remember the afternoon I first spoke the words out loud to Amanda. He's been moving money through fake companies. He's been stealing from the business and hiding it. Saying it made it real. It made a hole in my life into something with edges I could grasp. Amanda's eyes softened, but she did not flinch. We'll bring in a forensic accountant. We'll file for discovery and get a temporary freeze on assets. You did the right thing by not confronting him. For a long time after that, I sat and stared at the safe serial number I'd photographed. The evidence accumulated like snow. It was cold and bright and impossible to ignore. At night I lay awake, listening to Lily breathe in the next room, thinking about futures, her future, my future, and how fragile they had been under the weight of one man's choices. We filed. We waited. And while the law did its slow, methodical work, I felt a small, fierce thing inside me begin to grow. Not revenge in the classical thunderstorm sense, but a steadier reclaiming. If he had built a secret life, I would dismantle it piece by piece. Not with screams but with paperwork and patience. The plan was a slow burn, but it felt righteous in a way I had not expected. And under the unbearable fear lay a new, shimmering possibility, one that, even on that first night, felt better than anything I had allowed myself to imagine. The waiting was the hardest part. Court filings take time, signatures require appointments, and the machinery of the legal system moves at a speed designed to frustrate anyone in crisis. Yet I knew patience was my weapon. If I rushed, if I tipped my hand too early, Eric would vanish the money and I'd be left with nothing but suspicions and regret. So I played my role. I cooked dinners, folded laundry, asked him about his day with a smile that felt like glass against my teeth. He didn't suspect a thing. In fact, he seemed relaxed in those weeks, like a man who believed the world was still in his control. He'd whistle when shaving in the morning, linger over his wine at night, even joke with Lily at the table. To him, I was still the quiet wife, the one who didn't need to know everything. What he didn't know was that behind the mask of routine, I was orchestrating his undoing. Amanda connected me with a forensic accountant named David. He was meticulous, middle-aged, with spectacles that made him look more like a patient schoolteacher than a man who spent his life tracing lies through numbers. When he opened the files I'd given him, photographs of the ledgers, bank statements, copies of receipts, his eyebrows rose. "This is not just hidden money," he said. "This is deliberate fraud. We're talking about tax evasion, asset concealment, and possible embezzlement from his company." The word fraud rang in my ears like a bell. Fraud meant consequences. Fraud meant leverage. Fraud meant he wouldn't be the one holding the cards anymore. David traced the transactions with the precision of a surgeon. These shell companies aren't real businesses. They're placeholders designed to move money into personal accounts or overseas holdings. The safe you found? That could contain original contracts, proof of transactions, or even cash. Whatever it is, it's evidence. You've got something very powerful here. I walked out of David's office into the bright noon sun, blinking like I had just stepped into another life. And in a way I had. For years I'd been the woman kept on the sidelines, told don't worry about it, or that's business talk you wouldn't understand. But now I was holding a map of his empire and I finally understood. The next step was delicate. Amanda arranged for an emergency court order to freeze joint assets and request access to the storage unit through proper legal channels. It would take days, maybe weeks. But meanwhile, she encouraged me to keep building my quiet case. Every receipt, every inconsistency, every slip of the tongue matters. Document it all. One day soon you'll need it. So I became a recorder of small details. Eric left the house at odd hours, claiming late-night meetings. I noted the times, the dates, the length of his absences. He used a second phone sometimes, one he thought I didn't know about. I snapped a photo when he left it charging on the kitchen counter. He came home once with mud on his shoes that didn't match the places he said he'd been. I kept a log. All of it, carefully stored on a password-protected drive Amanda had set up for me. And still he suspected nothing. One night stands out in my memory. He poured himself a glass of scotch and leaned back in his chair with the smugness of a man convinced the world was his. You know, you worry too much, he told me. Life's about trust. You've got to trust the people closest to you. I wanted to laugh in his face, but I smiled instead, playing the docile wife one more time. Because I knew the truth. He had built his entire kingdom on lies, and the walls were already beginning to crumble. 2 weeks later, the first crack appeared. Amanda called me to say the judge had approved access to the storage unit. A court officer and David would accompany me to inventory its contents legally, so nothing could be challenged later. I didn't sleep that night. My mind spun with questions. What if he'd already cleared it out? What if the safe was empty? What if this whole thing fell apart? But the next morning, when we unlocked unit #34B under the watchful eye of the officer, everything was still there. The boxes. The crates. The safe. It felt like stepping into a vault of his lies. David moved quickly, photographing everything with a precision that made me admire him. He never expected anyone to look here, he murmured. This is years' worth of careful planning. The officer documented the scene while Amanda flipped through ledgers with gloved hands. Inside the safe, once it was drilled open, were 3 passports. One Eric's, one with a false name but his picture, and one belonging to someone I didn't recognize. Alongside them were stacks of cash, bonds, and a USB drive. Amanda slipped the drive into an evidence bag. This, she said, is likely the smoking gun. My knees trembled as I stood there. This was no longer about suspicion. This was proof. He hadn't just been hiding money. He had built an entire double life, ready to vanish the moment it suited him. On the drive home, Amanda's words echoed in my head. You've done brilliantly. You've given us a fortress of evidence. Now we wait for the legal hammer to fall. But I didn't want to just wait. The fire in me had grown into something larger. I wanted him to see, to feel the net closing around him. I wanted the satisfaction of watching the man who thought he held all the power realize that his empire of secrets had been toppled by the wife he underestimated. That night I sat across from him at dinner, watching him laugh at something Lily said. He looked at me, smiling, and raised his glass. To us, he said, as though he had nothing to fear. I clinked my glass against his, my smile steady, my heart a storm. And in that moment I knew something with perfect clarity. The result of uncovering his secret wouldn't just be survival for me. It would be freedom. It would be justice. And it would be so much better than I had ever imagined. The weeks that followed were a strange blend of normal life and quiet warfare. On the surface, I was still the same woman I had been: school drop-offs, PTA meetings, errands, and the steady hum of suburban life. But beneath it all, a secret current ran through me, like an underground river cutting its way through stone. I had evidence now, undeniable and damning, and the legal team was moving forward with careful precision. Amanda had filed motions to freeze accounts tied to the shell companies, and David was preparing financial reports that mapped every stolen dollar. The USB drive retrieved from the safe had already revealed documents that tied Eric directly to the transfers. It wasn't just circumstantial. It was deliberate, calculated fraud. But Eric was still oblivious. He strutted through the house with the same smug air, kissed Lily on the forehead before bed, and told me half-truths about his business trips. I had learned to nod along, to feign interest, even as I recorded the inconsistencies in my private log. One Saturday afternoon, he announced he had to leave for an emergency meeting. I watched him drive off in his sleek black sedan, the car he loved more than anything else he owned. Within an hour, Amanda called me. "He's not at a meeting," she said. "He's at the antique gallery tied to the shell company." I tightened my grip on the phone. What's he doing there? Moving items. Possibly art or antiques purchased with the laundered money. The gallery is a front. The reality hit me hard. Eric wasn't just hiding money. He was laundering it through physical goods, converting cash into assets no one would think to question. Amanda reassured me. "This is good. The more he does, the more evidence we'll have." That night, I lay awake listening to the sound of his steady breathing beside me. How could he sleep so peacefully, knowing the lies he was living? How could he touch his daughter's cheek with hands that signed fraudulent contracts? I felt an ache inside me, not just anger but grief for the man I had once loved. Or maybe grief for the illusion I had built around him. 2 days later, I received a call that shifted everything. It was from a private investigator Amanda had brought into the case. A wiry man named Jack with a voice like gravel. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "you need to see this." We met at a diner on the edge of town. Jack slid a folder across the table to me. Inside were photographs, grainy but clear enough. Eric standing arm in arm with a woman I had never seen before. She was younger, maybe 30, with dark hair and a sharp smile. The timestamps on the photos matched the weekends he had claimed to be traveling for work. For a long moment I couldn't breathe. The betrayal was layered now, thick as tar. Not just financial lies, not just hidden passports and shell companies, but another woman. A second life lived openly while I played the dutiful wife. Jack spoke quietly. "We believe she's connected to the shell companies. Her name is on 2 of them. He's not just seeing her, he's using her as part of the operation." I pushed the folder away, my hands trembling. It was strange. I had expected heartbreak, maybe even tears. Instead, what I felt was something colder, sharper. A clarity I hadn't known before. This wasn't just a marriage falling apart. This was war. When I told Amanda, she nodded gravely. "This strengthens your case. Fraud, concealment, and now adultery tied to financial crime. The court will have no sympathy for him." The next week became a blur of preparation. Amanda began drafting divorce papers. David refined the financial analysis. Jack continued shadowing Eric, building a timeline that would be impossible to dispute. And me? I lived my double life with a strange sense of calm. Eric had no idea that every smile I gave him, every meal I placed on the table was part of the act. He had no idea that the woman he thought would stay quiet had built an arsenal of evidence strong enough to bury him. One evening, after Lily was asleep, he poured himself another drink and leaned against the counter. "You know," he said casually, "I've been thinking maybe we should take a trip. Just you and me. Somewhere far. Start fresh." The audacity nearly made me laugh. A trip? Was this his plan? To lure me away, keep me distracted while he finalized his escape? Or maybe it was guilt, a sudden urge to appease the wife he no longer respected. I sipped my tea and forced a smile. "That sounds nice," I said, my voice even. "Where were you thinking?" He shrugged. "Maybe the islands. Somewhere quiet." I looked into his eyes then, and for the first time I didn't see the man I had married. I saw a stranger. A liar. A man whose empire was crumbling. Even if he didn't know it yet. And I thought to myself, yes, let's take a trip. A trip straight into the fire you built for yourself. Amanda called me the next morning with news that made my pulse race. The judge approved our motion. We'll be serving him with the divorce petition and evidence notice this week. Once he's served, accounts will freeze immediately. He won't be able to touch a cent. I felt something bloom in my chest then. A strange mix of relief and triumph. For so long I had been the silent observer, the woman in the shadows. Now finally I was about to step into the light with all the power he thought I never had. But part of me still wanted to see his face. To watch the exact moment he realized his secret world had collapsed. I wanted to be there when the mask slipped, when the smugness drained out of him. That thought carried me through the days leading up to the service. The morning of, I cooked breakfast as if it were any other day. Pancakes for Lily, coffee for Eric. He kissed me on the cheek, thanked me with his usual careless charm. Then just as he was about to leave for work, a knock came at the door. Eric opened it to find a court officer standing there, papers in hand. His smile faltered as the man spoke the words. "You've been served." I stood at the counter, mug in hand, watching the exact moment his world shifted. His eyes flicked to me, confusion and anger swirling, but I didn't flinch. For the first time in years I felt taller than him. Stronger. He tried to speak, to protest, but the officer handed him the packet and turned away. Eric closed the door slowly, the papers trembling in his hand. He looked at me, his voice low and dangerous. "What did you do?" I set my mug down gently, met his gaze and smiled. "I discovered your secret. And the result is better than I ever imagined." I sat in the driver's seat of my car after leaving the cafe, my hands trembling as they gripped the steering wheel. Everything Laura had told me still echoed in my mind like a haunting melody I couldn't escape. Michael's web of lies was bigger than I had imagined, and though my heart pounded with anxiety, I also felt something else rising within me, resolve. For years I had been the silent, supportive wife, always putting his needs above mine, always turning a blind eye when things felt off. But now I wasn't just uncovering his betrayal. I was piecing together the puzzle of the man I once thought I knew. When I pulled into my driveway, the house looked different to me. The front porch, where Michael and I used to sit and laugh on summer evenings, suddenly felt like a stage where I had been unknowingly acting out a role in his play. My home, once a place of safety, was now littered with ghosts of secrets I had yet to fully unearth. Inside, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and began digging deeper. If Michael thought he could hide his affairs, his offshore accounts, and his shady deals, he underestimated me. Years of being an administrative assistant at a law firm had taught me how to find things people didn't want found. I knew how to trace names, follow money, and connect dots that didn't want connecting. It didn't take long before I hit gold. His email account, which he hadn't logged out of on the shared iPad, revealed a thread of messages with a woman named Danielle. The tone of their words left little to the imagination. Passionate promises, lavish plans, and one message in particular that made my stomach drop. "Don't worry, babe. Once everything is finalized, you'll have the life you deserve. The house, the car, the money, just a little longer." I stared at those words for what felt like an eternity, my throat tightening with a mix of anger and disbelief. Finalized? What was he talking about? Our divorce? No. Michael had never once mentioned divorce. At least not to me. I scrolled further and found attached documents. Property deeds, bank account transfers, life insurance details. My name, once present on everything we had built together, was slowly being erased. That night I barely slept. I kept replaying every conversation, every suspicious late-night text he brushed off as work, every time he said he was traveling for business but came back with nothing to show for it. My gut had always whispered that something was wrong. Now I had proof. By the following morning I had a plan. I wasn't going to confront him just yet, that would give him power. Instead, I'd play the part he expected, the quiet, oblivious wife. But behind the scenes, I would build my case like a prosecutor preparing for trial. I began documenting everything. Screenshots of emails, copies of bank statements, photographs of receipts he carelessly tossed aside. I even checked the trash bin in his home office and found shredded documents that, when pieced together like a puzzle, revealed yet another transfer of funds to an account I didn't recognize. The deeper I went, the darker it got. One evening, while combing through his desk drawer, I found a prepaid cell phone tucked beneath a pile of old receipts. Curiosity prickled through me as I powered it on. Dozens of messages lit up the screen, most from Danielle, some from unknown numbers. They weren't just about love and plans, they hinted at something else. Something dangerous. "We need the money by the end of the month. She's not going to suspect anything, right? Make sure it looks clean this time." I sat frozen, the phone heavy in my hands. This wasn't just infidelity. Michael was involved in something far more sinister. For days I debated what to do. Go to the police? Hire a private investigator? Or quietly gather enough evidence to protect myself before confronting him? In the end, I decided on a hybrid approach. I discreetly reached out to a retired private investigator named Frank, an old client from my law firm days. Frank was blunt, gruff, and not easily shocked. When I told him what I'd found, his silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. "Don't do anything rash," he finally said. "If what you're saying is true, Your husband's playing a very dangerous game. And if you push him too hard too soon, you could get caught in the crossfire. Crossfire. The word chilled me. But Frank agreed to help. He had contacts who could trace Michael's financial movements more deeply than I could. He also suggested I start protecting myself. Separate accounts, legal counsel, even a safe place to stay if things turned ugly. The next week I lived a double life. To Michael, I was the same smiling wife who cooked dinner, asked about his day, and pretended not to notice when he slipped out late at night. But behind his back I was archiving files, meeting with Frank, and slowly building an arsenal of evidence that painted Michael not just as a cheater, but as a man entangled in crimes that could destroy both of us. And then one night everything came crashing down. Michael came home late, his tie loosened, his eyes sharp with suspicion. He dropped his briefcase on the counter and looked at me in a way that made my skin prickle. "You've been different lately," he said, his voice calm but edged with steel. "Is there something you want to tell me?" I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "Different? No, just tired. Work's been busy, that's all." His eyes lingered on me, searching, probing. For a moment I thought he could see right through me. See the evidence tucked away in a hidden folder on my laptop, the files stashed in a locked drawer. Finally he smirked. "Good. Because I'd hate to think you were hiding something from me." The irony of his words almost made me laugh, but I held it in. Instead I excused myself, went upstairs and closed the bedroom door. My hand shook as I pressed my back against it, my mind spinning. He knew something. Maybe not everything, but enough to make him wary. I realized then that my window of preparation was shrinking. If I didn't act soon, Michael might make his move. And I couldn't afford to be one step behind. That night, as the house settled into silence, I whispered to myself, "You thought I'd stay quiet, Michael. But you have no idea what's coming." The following days were some of the most nerve-wracking of my life. Every moment felt like I was walking on a tightrope, pretending to be the oblivious, loving wife while knowing I was secretly dismantling Michael's carefully constructed lies piece by piece. I became hyper-aware of every little thing he did. The way he glanced at me when I picked up my phone. The way he checked his watch when I asked him about his day. The way he lingered a second too long in his study, as though guarding something inside. But the more he thought he had me fooled, the harder I worked behind the scenes. Frank, the retired investigator, was making progress. He had uncovered a series of offshore accounts, not just one. And those accounts were linked to shell companies that Michael appeared to be funneling money through. "This isn't just about infidelity," Frank said during one of our hushed meetings at a small diner outside of town. "Your husband's laundering money. And if he's doing this, he's in deep with people who don't forgive mistakes." I stirred my coffee absent-mindedly, my stomach twisting into knots. "So he's not just betraying me. He's putting my life in danger too." Frank nodded. "If they think you know something you shouldn't, you could become a liability. That's why you need to protect yourself, now more than ever." That night when I returned home, I looked at Michael with new eyes. He wasn't just a cheater anymore. He wasn't just a liar. He was a man walking a dangerous line, and he was dragging me with him. And yet, he still thought he had control. The opportunity to turn the tables came sooner than I expected. One evening, Michael announced he'd be leaving for a business trip. The word dripped with irony, but I pretended not to notice. Instead, I kissed him on the cheek, told him to be safe, and waved him off. As soon as he left, I went straight to his office. I had never dared to touch his briefcase before, but tonight felt different. My heart raced as I clicked open the lock with the small key I'd secretly copied weeks earlier. Inside, I found more than I bargained for. There were documents, yes, but also stacks of cash. Neatly bundled. Thousands upon thousands of dollars. I sifted through papers and discovered ledgers scribbled with codes and names I didn't recognize. But one thing stood out. A folder marked with my name. My breath caught as I opened it. Inside were documents I'd never seen before. Papers that painted me as complicit in his crimes. Transfers made under my name. Signatures forged to look like mine. If Michael were ever caught, he was ready to throw me under the bus and watch me take the fall. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. This was war. That night I called Frank again, my voice shaking. "He's setting me up. He's making it look like I'm part of this." Frank cursed under his breath. I knew he was smart, but this is ruthless. Listen, you need to stay calm. Don't let him suspect you know. Keep collecting evidence. When the time comes, we'll make sure he pays for every lie. But I couldn't just sit and wait anymore. The next morning I went to work like usual, but instead of answering emails and filing paperwork, I reached out to a lawyer I trusted. Not just any lawyer. Someone with experience in both divorce law and criminal defense. If Michael thought he could strip me of everything and leave me with nothing, he had underestimated me. For the next week, I prepared my counterattack in silence. I withdrew money into a separate account he didn't know about. I moved valuables into a storage unit under a false name. And most importantly, I compiled every piece of evidence into a neat, unshakable file. Every email, every receipt, every bank transfer. And tucked in the middle of it all, the most damning evidence. Proof that he had forged my signature. But just as I was ready to make my move, something happened that nearly unraveled it all. Michael came home earlier than expected from his so-called business trip. He walked into the house with a sharp look in his eyes, scanning the room like a predator sniffing out prey. "Why are you home so early?" I asked, forcing my voice to sound casual. "Meeting was cancelled," he said flatly, setting his briefcase down. His gaze landed on me, piercing, unreadable. "What have you been doing while I was gone?" I smiled faintly, shrugging. "Same as always. Work, laundry, cooking. The usual." But his eyes didn't soften. Instead, he stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You haven't been snooping around, have you?" My heart skipped a beat, but I forced a laugh. "Snooping? About what?" "Michael, you sound paranoid." He studied me for what felt like an eternity before finally shaking his head and walking away. But my hands trembled long after he left the room. That night, when he fell asleep, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, realizing the truth. I was running out of time. If I didn't strike first, Michael would. And if he did, he wouldn't just ruin me, he could ruin my entire life. By the end of the week, I had made my decision. I wasn't going to sit quietly any longer. Michael thought he had the upper hand, but he was about to learn the one lesson he had underestimated. Never corner a woman who has nothing left to lose. The morning I decided to stop being afraid, the air felt electric, like the moment before a storm breaks. I woke before dawn, Lily still asleep in her room, and sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee gone cold. The file I'd built sat between my palms like a talisman. Emails, screenshots, ledger photos, the forged documents that could have destroyed me. I breathed in and told myself out loud, "This stops today." Frank met me at a diner near the river. His hat pulled low, eyes steady. He slid a thick envelope across the booth and pushed it toward me. "We've got contacts inside the bank," he said. "They'll cooperate if we give them the right paperwork. But understand this, once we pull the trigger, this moves fast. You need a plan for Lily and for yourself." I'd already thought of that. The night before, I'd quietly opened a safety deposit account in my maiden name, transferred emergency funds, and booked a friend's spare guest room for a week, somewhere Lily could stay if things went sideways. I had packed a small bag with clothes and important papers, and tucked it under the passenger seat of my car. The practical steps steadied me. Fear is easier to face when you have a suitcase ready. Back at the house, I went through the motions of a normal day. I kissed Lily's forehead, packed her lunch, and made a show of helping Michael locate his keys. He barely glanced at me. To him, I was still the background hum of domestic life. He would regret that assumption. At noon, Amanda arrived carrying a stack of legal papers the size of a small brick. "We file civil and criminal complaints simultaneously," she said without fanfare. "Civil for the divorce and asset recovery. Criminal for the embezzlement and forgery. The bank is on board for a temporary freeze once they see the affidavits." Her voice was a metronome, steady, confident. I clung to it like a rope. David, the forensic accountant, presented his findings like a man narrating a tragedy's bills of sale. "These transfers are routinized," he explained. "They go through a web of shell companies to accounts in 3 different countries. But the pattern is sloppy enough. There's overlap, repeated vendor names, and the timing correlates with company cash flows. If we subpoena the servers and get a few cooperation letters, this thing unravels." He tapped the USB drive on the table, the one that had come from the safe. "This contains the key ledger." We spent the afternoon filing motions, drafting affidavits, and calling in favors. Every phone call felt like pulling a thread in a sweater. Slow and deliberate, knowing that the whole thing could come apart in an instant. Amanda arranged for the judge to consider an ex parte motion so we could get immediate temporary relief. Frank coordinated with bank contacts. David prepared a sworn statement. I signed my name until my hand ached. That evening Michael came home early. He stood in the doorway, rainwater beating on his coat, and looked at me like a man seeing a stranger in his house. "Everything okay?" he asked. There was a softness in his voice that felt false. "Yes," I said. "Everything's fine." He didn't push it. He was either too arrogant to suspect me or too distracted by his own empire to notice my calm. Either way, it worked in my favor. At 9 p.m., Amanda called with 3 words that felt like a detonator being pulled. They froze it. The bank had placed holds on several key accounts, including the ones tied to the shell companies. Transfers stopped. Transactions bounced. Overnight, the flow of cash that had lubricated Michael's secret life slowed to a drip. He noticed the next morning when a vendor emailed him, urgent, about a bounced payment. He frowned, then checked his accounts on his phone. I watched him from the kitchen doorway while Lily ate cereal, the small slice of domestic normalcy anchoring me. His face went hard, and for the first time in months he looked truly afraid. He called his attorney. He called vendors. He paced the study with a phone pressed to his ear, voice clipped and panicked. I moved through the house like a ghost, listening for sounds I could use. Power I was learning, sounds like a man's quick breaths on the phone, and the rustle of paper as he shuffles through documents looking for an escape route. That afternoon Michael drove to the gallery, the front he used to launder cash through antiques. Frank, who had been tailing him discreetly, called me from a payphone 3 blocks away. "He's there," he said. "Don't go." But I couldn't resist. I needed to see the man who had built a phantom life out of lies, to measure the damage I'd done with my own 2 hands. I drove slowly, keeping to the shadows. The gallery's windows were darkened, a closed sign swinging on the door, but through a side window I saw Michael inside, rifling through a ledger, muttering curses under his breath. He looked smaller without the armor of pretense. When he left, he walked faster as if driven. He drove past me without seeing me in the car across the street. For a second I wanted to step on the gas and follow him, to confront him in the parking lot and shout everything I knew. But Amanda's voice in my head, "Don't create a spectacle," kept me steady. 2 nights later, the criminal investigators appeared at our doorstep. Detectives in plain coats knocked politely, and I invited them in. They explained the process, their questions clinical and compassionate at once. They wanted me to recount everything, the notebook, the storage unit, the forged papers. I did. I told them about the passports, the safe, the offshore transfers, the texts that hinted at complicity. They took notes and photographs, and I watched my life spill into their files like water poured into columns. Michael was served with a subpoena that day as well. The look he gave me as the officer handed him the paperwork was a raw, animal thing. Hurt, fury, disbelief. For the first time, his veneer cracked, and the glimpse of fear that flashed across his face was nearly sweet. He lashed out predictably. He denied everything publicly, spinning stories to anyone who would listen. A smear campaign, harassment, desperation. But the evidence, a fortress of bank statements and sworn testimony, was difficult to spin. David had constructed a map so precise it behaved like a trap. Every transaction led back to the same dead ends, the same shell addresses, the same imminent exposures. The backlash came in ugly forms. Anonymous emails arrived at my work. A car slowed by my driveway a few evenings, tires whispering as it passed. Once, the neighbor's security camera caught a van idling across the street for 30 minutes. Frank and Amanda reassured me. These were intimidation tactics, common when men with power panic. But their words did little to soothe the icy fear that coiled in my gut at night. I took more precautions. I put Lily on a different school pickup schedule. I installed new locks and a security system. I began carrying my phone in a way that made it easy to call for help. Small things, but each one felt like a stitch in an invisible armor. And then 2 weeks after the freezes and subpoenas, something unexpected happened. An ally from inside Michael's circle stepped forward. Jordan, the junior accountant I'd only met once at a PDA fundraiser, emailed Amanda with a short, trembling message. "I can't stay silent. I saw transfers. I'll testify. He attached documents, internal emails where Michael's hand was all over the plan. I remember sitting in Amanda's office and reading Jordan's email, and feeling something lift off my shoulders. Jordan's courage was a revelation. Proof that truth has a way of finding its voice. But courage has a cost. That night our house was egged. My window shattered from a rock thrown through it. A note was left on the porch, simple words scrawled and menacing. Drop it or pay the price. I stood in the kitchen holding Lily's art supplies while Amanda called the district attorney. I felt raw and exposed and strangely more alive than I had in years. You could walk away, Amanda said softly later, when the detectives had taken photographs and fingerprints and taken statements. You could drop everything and escape, but you didn't. And you won't. Not when your child's future and your dignity are at stake. That night, as I tucked Lily under the covers and turned off the light, she reached for my hand and whispered, "Will everything be okay, Mama?" I kissed her forehead and listened to the steady rise and fall of her breath. I didn't promise an easy ending. I didn't pretend the road forward would be painless. Instead, I said the truth, the only promise I could keep. We'll be safe. I promise I'll protect you. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance, the sound folding into the dark like some sad hymn. Inside, I felt the strange, fierce calm of someone who had chosen a path and would see it through. The fight was far from over. But for the first time in a long while, I believed the result could be better than I'd ever imagined. The storm finally broke on a gray Thursday morning. Michael had left the house in a rush, muttering under his breath, his phone clamped to his ear. He was unraveling. I could feel it in the way he slammed the door, the way he barked orders to people who no longer jumped as quickly as they once did. The power he had clung to for years was slipping, and like sand through his fingers, the more he tried to hold on, the faster it ran out. By noon, Amanda called with a tone of triumph in her voice. The DA has enough to indict. They're issuing a warrant. It'll happen today. My breath caught. Today. Yes. Stay calm. Stay away from him. Let the system do its job. But staying calm felt impossible. Every muscle in my body vibrated with tension. I paced the kitchen, my eyes glued to the clock, the silence of the house pressing in. Lily was at school safe, thank God. I wanted to be anywhere but inside that suffocating house, yet I knew I had to wait. And then at 3:42 p.m. the phone rang again. It was Frank this time, his voice low and firm. They got him. The image bloomed in my mind instantly. Michael in his tailored suit, wrists in handcuffs, his face a mask of outrage and disbelief. The man who had once believed himself untouchable, led past cameras and flashing lights, stripped of his armor of lies. When the footage appeared on the evening news, it was exactly as I had imagined. The anchor spoke of financial crimes, fraudulent transfers, an ongoing investigation. Michael's name scrolled across the ticker, his mugshot plastered on the screen. He looked smaller somehow, deflated. His arrogance curdled into something desperate. I sat on the couch, my hands trembling, tears streaming down my face. They weren't tears of sadness. They were something else, relief, vindication, release. Years of manipulation, silence, and deceit had culminated in this moment. The phone buzzed constantly that night. Friends, colleagues, neighbors calling, some in shock, some pretending they had always suspected. I ignored most of them. The only call I answered was from Jordan, the young accountant who had taken such a risk. "You did it," he said quietly. "You stopped him." "No," I replied, my voice steady. "We did." The days that followed were a blur of hearings, depositions, and statements. Michael's empire collapsed piece by piece as investigators uncovered more than anyone had imagined. Not just hidden bank accounts but fraudulent property holdings, fake contracts, bribes tucked into business deals. Each revelation was another nail in the coffin of the man who had once ruled our lives. Of course, Michael fought back. He hired high-priced attorneys, spun narratives of persecution, even tried to paint me as a bitter ex-wife seeking revenge. But the evidence was a tidal wave, and no amount of shouting could hold it back. The forged signatures alone, my name scrawled across contracts I'd never seen, were enough to strip him of credibility. I testified in court, my hands shaking but my voice unwavering. I told the truth. About the notebook. About the safe. About the documents that had nearly framed me for crimes I hadn't committed. I looked Michael in the eye as I spoke, and for the first time I saw fear there. Not of me but of the truth itself. The verdict when it came was everything I had hoped for. Guilty. On multiple counts. The judge's gavel sounded like thunder, sealing his fate. Michael was sentenced to years in prison. His assets were seized, his companies dismantled. And though the money he had stolen couldn't all be recovered, the court ensured Lily and I were provided for. Amanda had fought fiercely for that, and I would always be grateful. But beyond the money, beyond the legal victories, something far greater had been returned to me. My sense of self. For so long, I had lived in the shadows of Michael's lies. I had doubted myself, silenced myself, convinced myself that keeping the peace was better than confronting the storm. But now I knew better. I had walked through fire and emerged not burned, but forged. Stronger. Clearer. Free. The weeks after the trial were quiet. Too quiet at first. I found myself listening for the sound of his footsteps in the hallway, the slam of his briefcase on the counter. It took time for the absence of his presence to feel like peace rather than emptiness. One evening I sat on the porch with Lily. She leaned her head on my shoulder, her small hand tucked into mine. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of pink and gold. "Are we really safe now?" she asked softly. I kissed her hair and whispered, "Yes, sweetheart. We're safe. And we're free." And in that moment I believed it. Life began to rebuild itself in quiet ways. I went back to work, but this time I chose projects that made me proud, not just busy. I reconnected with friends I had drifted from, people who had missed me but never stopped caring. I even took up painting again, something I hadn't touched since college. Each brushstroke felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I had thought was lost. As for Michael, he faded into the background noise of court appeals and prison sentences. Occasionally his name surfaced in the news, a reminder of the man he had once pretended to be. But to me he was no longer a looming shadow. He was a closed chapter, a lesson written in ink too dark to ever forget. I realized then that the result I had imagined when I first discovered his secret wasn't just about revenge or justice. It wasn't even about the courtroom victories or the financial settlements. The result, the better-than-imagined part, was the life I found on the other side of his lies. A life where my voice mattered. A life where my daughter was safe. A life where I could breathe again. One night, months later, Amanda and I met for dinner to celebrate the finalization of the divorce and the end of all proceedings. She raised her glass to me. "You did it," she said, her smile proud. I shook my head, smiling back. No, he did it. He thought he could bury me under his lies. But instead he buried himself. All I did was stand up. And as the laughter and clinking of glasses filled the restaurant, I felt something deep inside me settle at last. My ex-husband's secret had been the weapon he thought would keep me silent forever. But by uncovering it, I had found not just justice but freedom. And that freedom, that peace, was better than I had ever dared to imagine.